And this is a game-changing webinar, my friends. If you go through this entire webinar, it might be a little long drawn, but I'll tell you, it will clear so many myths about spiders, which are such do-gooders to our ecosystem, to our survival, and we don't even look at them properly. And we're always scared of them. And, I was talking to my mother this morning, and she says, let's just, monsoon will start next month, and maybe we should just clear up every corner in the house, and there'll be spiders and there'll be things, creepy crawlies all over the place. So I said, Mom, just hang on, just hang on. Let's just figure this out properly and understand that while we want cleanliness in the house, we also want spiders. We also want, other things to be curbed. So let's just go slow and see what we can come up with. While we want the spiders in the house, we also want to be absolutely respectful to every species on this planet. So that's something that's my take on it. And just before I went live with you all, I was talking to Devi, and I don't know where she disappeared. She'll be back soon. And I was talking to her, and she says the plight of spiders is to be discussed at length, and we need to actually reach out to more and more people about talking about the cause of spiders, the plight of spiders. How innocent these beings are and how mistreated they are by people. So that's the and she's the expert. So she's got lots of things to show you, lots of videos to show you. So hang tight and don't leave. It's 4 o'clock this afternoon, and I know that a lot of people are busy and they will go in and out, but that's fine. That's no problem. And people who missed out will get the replay link. And even if you miss out on certain parts, that's fine, because you'll get the replay link. I want you to make use of the replay link once it's over. Yeah, I'm just hoping that Devi comes back properly, because she had some internet issues, but she was online just now, and I can't see her any longer. Fareen, can you just call Devi and check if there's a glitch at her end? If there's a glitch, then ask her to reboot the system and log back in. And I can't wait to get started with her. And, so friends, in the meantime, I'm going to make use of this time introducing her to you while she's not there, and she will log any moment. Let me read out her introduction to you. So Devi is currently pursuing her doctorate degree at Utkal University on the paddy field spiders of Odisha. She's been studying spiders and mostly interested in their behavior and role in the ecosystem as a generalist predator for the past 8 years. Her conservation focus is mostly to make science applicable for people, communities, and animals, aiming at sustainable development. For the past 5 years, she's been working with the National Museum of Natural History, posted at Bhubaneswar Center, to document the natural history of the region and also spread awareness about the conservation of biodiversity at various sections of the society. She's previously worked as forensic biologist with CBI New Delhi for 3 years, reporting crime cases. She's worked with Wildlife Institute of India for tiger translocation program at Panna National Park in 2010, and she's been part of ICZMP project tracking estuarine crocodiles nesting behavior in Kanika National Parks, Odisha, studying mass nesting of olive-ringed turtles in near Brahmapur. Hey, welcome, my friend. Good to see you again. I'm just reading out your introduction. If you can mute yourself. Fareen, Baba, just mute yourself. Thank you, sweetie. Okay. So, yeah. So I was just telling you friends that she's also been part of ICZMP project tracking estuarine crocodiles nesting behavior in Bhitarkanika National Park, Odisha, and studying mass nesting of olive ridleys near Berhampur. And those people, and those of you who don't know me, let me just check. Okay. So Fareen is no longer here. So friends who don't know me, I'll quickly read out my introduction. I'm Mohit Agarwal. I'm an experiential ecotourism specialist with a deep love for nature. I help people travel to some wonderful places in Asia. I'm on the board of Asian Ecotourism Network, and I've been trained and certified by GSTC in sustainable tourism. I'm the founder of Asian Adventures, a 27-year-old travel outfit. It's the largest bird-watching tour company in India. I'm also the founder of NatiNetter, an email marketing company that is now working to strengthen the communication for wildlife outfits. The company is on a large mission to help Asian elephants with their corridors, free the Himalayas of plastic waste, help small wildlife NGOs, and conserve the ancient Himalayan shrines. So that was a bit about me. I won't take much longer. It's 8 minutes past our start time. Over to you, Devi. Go right ahead.
Thank you so much, sir. There were some glitches. I'm really sorry for that. But I hope this is a very warm audience here. Good evening, all of you. I am Devi Priyadarshini from Regional Museum of Natural History, Bhubaneswar. That's a part of the Ministry of Environment and Forest, Government of India. But we have all been associated here today evening because we all love wildlife, isn't it? But sadly enough, sometimes what happens is we're a little biased when we say wildlife. We, all of you, when you talk about wildlife specifically, am I audible? Can anyone please confirm?
Absolutely. Go right ahead.
When we say wildlife, the first thing which comes into our mind is for the Indians, a tiger, for the Africans, a lion, for the rest of the world, I don't know how many other animals, but not the little creatures which are there right around us. Today, I'll be speaking about some animal which usually is very hated. You know, we don't use this word, but when it comes to this animal, people just freak out. We will go right ahead and see why is it so that we usually freak out with this animal without actually getting to know how beautiful and magnanimous can it really be. A very little creature, but it does so much to the ecosystem. Like I said, every little creature is part of wildlife, and the whole gamut when we consider the little critters cannot be left out. And by the way, we all think that this little creature called a spider is usually venomous, can kill humans sometimes, and whatnot. We will go slowly across this little journey of, say, 30-40 minutes and find out for ourselves that they actually are not so harmful. Like with snakes also, we have the same notion that every snake which comes across should be poisonous or venomous, and we will immediately fall into the laps of death once it bites us. But most of the snakes around us, like the spiders, are not venomous. So let's go right ahead. There's a little poetry here which says that they are friends of farmers. Please read it for yourself, and let me go to the next slide. Yeah, so hi again, and we will be delving a little deeper into the world of spiders. So everybody here may be thinking that spiders may not be a very interesting topic to discuss, but let me tell you that spiders are the world's best architects. Before we go into any particular feature, let us know where do they come from and where does this phobia come from. So this little story of the spiders and how they got their name. There was this Roman goddess called Athena, and the mortal. During those times, they used to have mortals like we humans and gods like even we have got gods. So the goddess was called Athena and the mortal was called Arachne. Now they fell into a tussle and there was a bet after a very long debate that who spins the best of silk. So, you know, silk actually dates back very long in our history. If you look at the Chinese history, even the world history, I think it's beyond 2000 years that we have a history of silk. So it's not impossible that even during those times, silk was being spun. Okay, so Arachne was thrown a challenge by Athena that she cannot spin better silk than the goddess. Now, when Arachne came out successful, the goddess could not bear all this jealousy within her, and she cursed that you should die. When Arachne was cursed, Athena felt bad again and turned her into a spider because she was guilty that because she failed, the history would have that Athena failed and she killed the mortal. So she turned her into a spider and cursed her that you will keep hanging through the same silk which you were trying to build or spin. And since then, Arachne has been hanging like a spider. So that's how they are called arachnids or Arachne. The ancient name or the Greek name, Arachne, has come from this word. So apart of these stories, we have a lot of phobia within us, like I said, about spiders. I don't know how many of you are arachnophobic, but many people, even when you look at them at homes, we feel that God knows why it is there, it should be away from this place. But you don't know that all the mosquitoes, the little bugs and the beetles are eaten up by the spiders, which actually do the job of cleaning, although the little webs make it a little messy in your rooms still. So where does phobia actually originate from in you? It's basically their legs, which look very prominent, of course, 8 of them. They crawl very fast, probably because of that. Some people have this notion that they can throw venomous bites. They are harmful when they urinate, that they spray some kind of chemicals. They have hairs coming out of the body, God knows what not. And of course, they can jump. So every other component which makes them actually very, very fearful. But let us look at it a little more closely. Now, this is the scientific part of where they come from in Arthropoda, which composes at least 80 or more than 80% of the whole animal kingdom, which I'll show you in the next slide. Arachnida is one which takes up a major part, in which we have the spiders, teaks, mites and scorpions and all the other arachnids. The 8-legged creatures basically fall into this class Arachnida, on which we will be focusing today. Now, like I was telling you, just look at the animal kingdom, you know, all the tiger, lion, a horse and buffaloes and God knows what not, all the vertebrates come under this 5%. That's that little 5%. And look at this whole 73%, okay? They form the insects. Come down to this part, the purple part, which shows you the arachnids. They are 8%. So do you see clearly that this particular part, which composes 73%, is basically the food for all the rest of the phylum across the animal kingdom. So if the insects collapse or the insects are dead, we will not have all these surviving either. And this 8% basically controls the whole of the 73% here. So they are the primary predators of all the insect groups. That is how a very, very important role in the ecosystem. You must be thinking, I stay nicely inside my room, inside a hotel or a multiplex or some kind of a flat. I don't have to do anything with the insects. But think of the flora, think of the paddy fields, think of all the green areas. The insects would eat up all the plants, would finish off the paddy fields and every other crop fields had these guys not been there in place. So they are the best protectors of crops and every other green plant which is there, which is otherwise eaten up by the insects. So this way we are not actually trying to make insects a villain, but this is the balance of nature, that the insects which are also pollinators and play different other roles are being controlled by the arachnids. Okay. Yeah, so this is a very interesting slide. Let me tell you that here I have mentioned 48,446. This was accessed on 15th May last year. This year it has become 49,500 species. So we are almost nearing 50,000 species in the spiders across 130 families, 129 families to be precise. So why I tell you this is because if you look at this graph, we have explored only 17% of all the arachnids which we find, which means all the spiders and the scorpions and the teaks and mites you see around have only been explored. Not even 20% of it is known. Look at insects. We said that they compose 73%, but only 20% of them is known to the world. So you can imagine how many of them are yet to be discovered. Yeah. So let us now quickly go to what other animals are there in class Arachnida. Many of these you must not have seen, but this is quite famous. Again, like a villainous devil, the scorpion. We all must have read The Night of the scorpion, and a very beautiful poem, of course. And yeah, all these other people who are there in Arachnida are mostly ground dwellers. Some of them are arboreal. The spiders, of course, are space dwellers, and they all are predators of insects, like I said, to maintain the balance in the food chain. This is a little inside of the spider body. I would like to not go into the details, but show you a little video here. Let us see if you can make out. So do you see that this particular object, I mean, this particular illustration does not really look like any other animal body. When we have toads cut up and you have cockroaches shown, and you must have seen many other videos, this looks typically different. Let me tell you how. Do you see that this is the head of the animal and this is the abdomen? Just check this video out and you can tell me what exactly is the process which is going on. You may prefer to mute the audio if you wish. Okay. Yeah, so what I was telling you is that, if you could have seen, was the heart of the spider. So probably it was a very zoomed in picture. You may not have been able to see the back of the spider, but this is where the heart is located. And this is where you can find the heart of the spider. It is so odd that the abdomen contains the heart and the head contains the stomach, something which is very opposite to our bodies or the vertebrate bodies. We'll go ahead and see how the stomach functions. You can see a sucking stomach written over here because it sucks up its own meal, doesn't eat pretty much. And the heart is exactly located on the dorsal side, which I was trying to show you the sigilla visible and the pumping mechanism showing there. There is something, of course, with the figure 8 in spiders, because if you look at the body, it shows you a nice 8 being formed, and there are 8 eyes and 8 legs. So yeah, it's all about 8 with spiders. We call them octopoda, and 8 legs, which separates them into the subphylum of Chelicerata and class Arachnida. All class Arachnida members have got 8 legs, may not be 8 eyes, all of them, but 8 legs. Also in spiders, we have some who have got 6 eyes. So if you see the color and the distribution of eyes here, when we go into a little bit of taxonomy, I can show you how beautifully the eye arrangement can tell you that which family do the spiders belong to. So do you see how different they look at? This is a spider here, if you can see my pointer on the right top corner, which is from Australia. It's called Archis lancerius. Here on the left, we have a peacock, rainbow peacock spider, which is very famous for its dance. Both of them, they are not from India. The one in the middle, in the center, it's called the Goliath bird eater, the largest spider, which again, we don't find it here in India, but parts of America. This is from the Hawaiian Islands. You can see a happy face on the back of the spider. It's a Theridion from the Hawaiian Islands. These modifications are clear examples of how evolved a species is, and since how long they have been trying to adapt themselves to the planet and to all the changes which have been taking place. I was telling you about the 6 eyes. This particular spider here at the left corner, the right left corner, is a scytodid spider, and it's called a spitting spider. It usually would hang strings of its saliva and then catch insects without actually creating a web around itself. So very, very different behavior in all the families of the spiders. And this is a Scytodidae. which has got 6 eyes instead of 8. And like I said, spiders actually suck up their meal. They would try to externally inject out or eject out a kind of enzyme into the body of the animal, make it into a soup or a juice like composition, and then completely suck its own meal. So they take some time. You see wrapped up silk food there in their webs. They are there kept for dinner and lunch packed. And whenever they feel like eating it, they just need to eject out some juice into it and suck up their meal. It's so nice. They don't have to cook like us. Okay. So yeah, a little bit of the biggies here. The big spiders, which we usually won't encounter much, but if there are people from Western Ghats, there are people from the central India here, many of you would come across these spiders. Well, the one at the top right corner here has been discovered here in Odisha. This is Idiops nilgiri. The one here which is the first spider with the black and white composition you can see is a very famous theraphosid, which is Poecilotheria miranda. Beautiful white and black legs, and that is called Indian ornamental spider. Sadly enough, all these ornamental things are being exported out of this country illegally, and they are at a huge risk. Those spiders have not been saved under any schedule of the Wildlife Protection Act. But I would urge all of you that whenever you find anything happening like this, please report. And we can bring in legislations if it is reported. We find Chilobrachys fimbriatus here, the violet spider, which is again a very beautiful spider. It's Chilobrachys fimbriatus. And then we find this is Chilobrachys stridulans. This is from Assam. This we find in central India. I think we find in the south of India also, has been reported from Odisha also. And Chilobrachys fimbriatus is also very common. Now, what is important is these are huge animals, around 5 centimeter to 10 centimeter in their body length. What is instinctively a question coming to your mind is, these look so dangerous. Are they actually dangerous? So now let me tell you something about that. I was telling you about the pet trade. The one you see here is a Guti spider, which is found in Andhra Pradesh, and it's from Nandyal. I think it's reported from Nandyal, Andhra Pradesh, and this is endemic to India. The metallic Poecilotheria metallica. This is again very, very famously transferred, exported out to the different Western countries so that people can keep them as pets. And you can see the photograph here, very grotesque. I mean, they are eaten up in Kenya, in South African countries. I think some of the Southeast Asian countries also, they are eaten up as fries and God knows what not. So yeah, they are facing a lot of threat that way. But imagine, had they been that dangerous, would they have been eaten up like this? So none of these spiders, which I have already shown you, are as dangerous as fatal. None of them are fatal, because any bite which they can deliver into the body can only cause a local inflammation or infection, but not death. So the pet trade here in the world has gone into very, very bad limits, and India has already been there as the major source from where it is being exported. So that's how I said, if anybody comes across something like this, please report. Now we were talking about the venom. Okay, across the world we find some venomous spiders, I would admit. And from all of them, the Sydney funnel web, the one which you see which looks deadly in the center, is the Sydney funnel web spider, which is Atrax robustus, and acclaimed as the most venomous spider in the world. Well, there have been few death reports, and this is an Australian spider. We don't find it in India. On the top right, you see the Brazilian wandering spider, or the Funitra nigriventa. This particular spider also has got some very deadly implications on human beings, which has been proved from Brazil in the south of America. And then here you have the brown recluse spider, or the Loxosceles reclusa. Let me tell you that we have also got Loxosceles genus here in India, but we have not reported any of the fatal cases or any of death reports from spider bites yet. So it is possible that a family is reported from India, but not every spider in that family is equally venomous. So the venom development in spiders is again something which is related to evolution how how well are they adapted to their circumstances. That is important. So that is why we have this particular thing called poison or in their fangs, which is necessary for them to capture prey. So if you look at the habitat of these animals, some of them would kill birds, some of them can kill reptiles like little skinks, little lizards, sometimes frogs. So there they need more venom in their glands than the normal. And this is why probably the evolution of venom has become more in few of the spiders rather than the rest. Now, the very infamous widow spiders, which we all have heard of, we have seen so many Spider-Man videos and movies and God knows what not, and it is typically colored red when I saw it as a child. Okay, so the widow spiders are, you can see a skink which is here inside that lizard which is there caught inside its web. These are from the family Theridiidae. I'll come to the families later, but these redback spiders mostly are from family Theridiidae, and they have got a very messy hackled web. I mean, a very what do you call it? Irregular fashion of web in which these animals get caught, because they've got a very slimy body, but the web, because it is irregular, they can easily catch. Now, these widow spiders are supposed to contain neurotoxic venom, because of which they have again inflicted fatal bites onto human beings. So, like I said, a few of those spiders which I have named before, some of the families only, we have reported say 129 families from the world, and out of that only 4 or 5 families have spiders which can actually inflict a bite which is fatal. So again, widow spiders have not been reported in India, at least the redback spiders. We have got other widow spiders, the same similar looking spiders, the false widow spider from India reported here in the central India also, from Odisha also, from different parts of the country. But we again have never recorded any death or any bite as such from the spiders, leading anybody to death. So please, we need to get ourselves out of this misconception that spiders can really kill. So fatal spiders again will not be even 1% of their whole population, if I see. Like I said, looking at the animal toxins, we have the widow spider, which is also called supposed to have this kind of a disease called latrodectism because of the neurotoxins present. And contrary to them, we have the hackled obweaver, which is from family Euloboridae. These spiders are actually plain non-venomous spiders. They don't even have the minimum venom which is there in the spiders. So if you ask me if the spider has venom, I would say yes. If the spider has venom harmful to human beings, I would say no. So is it for the whole world? I would say no, it is not for the whole world. Some animals or some spiders in the world do have venom harmful to humans, but 99%, in fact 99 more percent of the spiders are harmless and non-injurious to human health. None of them in India yet found to be fatal for humans. Okay. Coming to some interesting facts of spiders, we have done away with all the venom things. Let us come to some very interesting thing, which is called the sexual dimorphism in spiders. So when we look at the human male and female, we almost find no difference other than the looks, which are different. But can you look at this animal and tell me, I mean, even guess that this particular animal in the center of the large, huge giant wood spider which you see is actually the male. So when I place this here, I haven't put a scale, but it is exactly 2 centimeters to 3 centimeters in its length, and the whole spider will be at least 6 times to 7 times longer and larger in size than the male. So if you see the first picture, you can see that tiny male glued to the abdomen of Nephila. This is Nephila in the forests where I have taken a picture, and the male glued to its abdomen, where it actually has got to fertilize the female. So talking about fertilization, if you see the top right picture, I'm sure you can see 2 bulb-like structures, which is also visible in the bottom right picture. Those 2 bulb-like structures, let me go to the next slide and show you. Yeah, so these are called the palps in the male. So why is it important? If you ask me here, when you look at the female, check again, The Nephila here being such a huge spider also, these palps in the central picture, if you see the mouth part, it's hanging upside down. So the bottom part is its head basically, and the top end is where the spinnerets are located, or it is the tail end. So the head end, if you see the palps here, they are not swollen. But here this tiny little male has got two palps and they are completely bulbous in structure, carrying the sperms and ready to mate with the female. So it's a matured male. Now this slide again, like I was telling you, we basically look into these structures to identify a spider, the epigyne of the female, which is the genitalia. Here I have tried to show a little slide which I had dissected during my dissertation work which I did. And in the left slide, you can see the male pedipalps, which are there, exactly dissected from the male of a Nephila, which I have shown you in the previous slide. So this particular structure is the sperm storing organ. And if you ask me if it is created inside this, no, they are not created inside it. It is created in the reproductive tract. The males will be spinning a very little web around in a tree where they hang, and then eject out the sperms, then put these palps into that web, and with suction pressure, these sperms get into the seminal duct once again before they are transferred into the female. So it's a very tricky process, and most of it is not seen and observed in nature. All what we see is that the male is sticking to the female and ready to mate, putting its pedipalps into the epigyne of the female, like it's visible here. You see two holes present here. If you can see those little holes which is visible, that is basically where these sharp structures would go in and transfer the sperm. So that is how mating happens in spiders. Mostly it would be the same process throughout the whole class. But what is different is many of these animals use a mating plug. So this is very interesting again, because the male does not want the other males to come and mate with the same female, so that its own progeny is protected. What it does is it will try to break off a part of this particular structure and let it remain here as a mating plug. So when it stays there, the next male who comes and tries to compete and again insert the palps into the female will be unable to transfer the sperms. So that is how it is tricky when you look at mating, and it is really very interesting. Okay, so the other parts, like I said, we look into the epigyne and palps of the spiders mostly for taxonomic identification. The primary and basic taxonomic identification can be done from the eyes. So if you look at this little picture which I've taken from the internet, a beautiful depiction or illustration, whatever you say, just look at the eye pattern. Before a few slides also, we had seen the figure of 8 and the number of 8. You see that there are a lot of little black spots on each head. These are basically heads of different spiders, and we find that these black structures are mostly the eyes. So now you see three prominent families, if I can name: Dinopidi having the largest eyes, then comes Salticidae, then we have Lycosidae. At least these eyes, I mean these families in the spider world would have the largest of eyes. When you look at the megalomorphs, they all have eyes clustered together at one spot in the center of the head, most of them at least like that, and very little eyes. They have got very, very strong sensation with their trichobothria, or the hair on their legs with which they sense. So if you see again, like I say, in spiders, evolution is so clearly visible. With Lycosidae, which is the wolf spider, and Salticidae, these are both ground-dwelling spiders. So they have absolutely no other arm in their body other than their goggle-like huge eyes. So eyes is everything for them. They use their eyes to hunt on the ground. They don't necessarily build webs like the orb weavers or the ones which make those round wheel-like webs. And they would use their eyes primarily to hunt. They would ambush and kill. So that is why those families have got big eyes. Contrarily, if you look at Thomisidae, can you see Thomisidae? The first picture on the top left, Thomisidae is a spider which would stalk sitting on the flower. So it basically does nothing. When it senses a bee buzzing around, all it has to do is jump and catch. It just simply needs no eyes. I mean, no eyes in the sense it doesn't need a further vision. So eyes here are not very strongly evolved. because it simply has to stalk sitting on the flower and doesn't have to move around much. So not much of loitering around or moving around on the ground. So the eyes are very, very small and may not be much used while hunting. Now, a little more about the genitalia, like I was showing you, these are illustrations we would make to identify. So this is a Theridion, not from India though. This has been described. If you see the genesis of the whole male genitalia, this is the final product when the adult matures. So when the baby is born or it just hatches out of the egg, for a very long time until it finally molds into the adult mold, after which it would never mold again, till that time we see all these phases of the palp, which is there on the pedipalp of the male. So it starts like this and goes on. The bulbous structure would develop, and the internal structures would also develop with each mold. With the female, here you see the epigyne. Similarly, with every mold, it matures, and the spermatheca is formed where it can store sperms, and then the epigyne, the complete structure, is formed with the final mold. This is important when we have to describe, and for taxonomic details, these particular things are very necessary when we have to describe a species or make one species look apart from the other or identify them from each other. Sometimes we have, species where we fall into a doubt. Now look at this picture. Here, this is the epigyne of a female. I've already shown you. This particular row in the top row was described as Toxius septemdentatus, and this is another species which was trying to be described as a new species. But when we look at the genitalia structure, they were almost the same, which says that this is a nomen dubium case, which means it is not a new species. So we come across many different nomenclature problems like this, and sometimes we have to create synonyms also. This is a little bit about taxonomy, because basically how spiders are named is like this. So the genitalia basically tells us the details about whether the spider can be made into a species, into a new species, a subspecies, or is just a morph or a variant of the existing one. A closer look into the legs of the spider. I was telling you a little about the Trichobothria a little while ago. The picture on your right side is that of a tarantula or a mygalomorph, the large-bodied spiders. These are sensory hairs, also called as Trichobothria. Some very strong spines are also visible here if you can look closely, and some will be retractable hair which they can expel from their body. Utricating hair. That is not present in all the animals, but most of them will have these sensory hairs which are called Trichobothria, and very, very slight, even feather touch sensation can be picked up by these hairs on the legs. This is a typical claw. The left side picture is that of a aranei or a aranid spider, a general small-bodied spider, which we say. These spiders will have a claw-like structure. Now you must be thinking, what do they do with the claws? They don't usually hunt with the claws, but this fine comb-like structures will actually help them navigate on the web. So the saying goes that a spider can never get entangled in its own web, because these claws help them walk and navigate and even spin the webs. How do they hang themselves? If you closely look at these structures, they are square kind of structures made out of silk. So how beautifully have they developed their silk glands and the spinnerets, which actually spin the silk, which is a protein which comes out from the silk glands. You know, these little tiny details make up just one species called spider, and a whole lifetime can be spent if you keep looking at these little details which are there about spiders in small pockets and stories. In this particular presentation, I have not taken webs into consideration much, except showing you a little bit of their architecture. You have to do a complete different session on webs and architecture if you have to look at spider webs, their genesis, the kind of protein they use, spinnerets, the glands, and whatnot. So this is one of the toughest material in the world, if you can see. The spider silk. Now, we will be taking up some of these aspects. I have tried to concisely show you what we will be looking at next. So yeah, like I was telling you, they are the best architects available in the animal world. Probably you must have seen so many natural history videos on Discovery. This particular spider, which is called Patu digua, the one on the top left, can you imagine this little structure is made out of silk or web, whatever you call it, and has been erected by a spider which is less than 1 millimeter. That is true. This is the smallest spider in the world, which is called Patu digua, which has been found in this cave from Colombia called Rio digua. And that is where this particular spider was found from. Very recently discovered, I think in 2017 or 16, we found it. And it has been named so. And it is less than 1 millimeter. Now you must be wondering why this kind of hinge around all, it looks like a barrier across a central pyramid structure. If you see the pyramid structure, the base is the actual place which contains eggs of the spider. And the whole structure outside is like a fence trying to guard the eggs. So imagine what kind of fine architecture has gone in to create this little kind of, you can see the spider here. I have tried to focus as much possible because it's an internet photograph. Of course, I could not, make it clearer than this, but it's so tiny that you actually have to go very close to photograph it, and was found in one of the caves in Colombia. Imagine. We never know what more secrets and mysteries nature has to reveal, and we never know, we may find tinier spiders than this building webs. But looking at the kind of architecture here, it was really, really unbelievable that this tiny kind of a creature can create such a beautiful structure. Marvels, truly. These are some of the largest spiders which make those webs. Many of you must be naturalists here, I believe, and must be interested in nature and wildlife, like I have been told. So take your cameras. If you have a macro camera or a point and shoot, whatever is possible, step out on a dew-filled morning, in a winter morning. You will find out amazing architecture and beautiful structures there across, vegetation which is there simply around your homes. When I stepped out one fine morning like this, I found some inverted bell-like structures here, which is the typical web pattern of a Cytophora spider, which is a web builder. And this is also one of the inverted tent web spiders. You can see the tent-like structure here. And when you photograph, when it is dew-laden, you can see the intricate architectural designs which it forms. Imagine one single female making the whole web like this. Until you see it, you can't believe it. This is one of the craziest spiders, the garden orb weaver, we call them, or the Argeo, very famously called the signature spider. Here, the signature is not visible, but we have already seen one of the pictures before this. I have shown you where we have seen the signature. If you want to go back a little, I think, yeah, the central spider here is the signature spider. Can you see the signature marks? Now, we have got a lot of theories why they make these signature marks, because some of the theories say that they can deflect ultraviolet radiation, because of which the marks are there. Some others opine that they can repel birds and other large animals who can come and dash across the web, basically damaging the whole web. So that's why as deflectors they work. But also some of us think that those can be attractive to insects, because they have got those white filling structures, and every white structure at night attracts insects. So that is how it is a multi-purpose use why they have signature on their webs. Not all, but the Argiops do have this signature pattern. Let us look into a little of motherhood in spiders, because they have been considered such hatred-filled species that I need to tell them little stories about how cozy, how warm, and how nice and beautiful creatures they can be. Imagine a mother laying eggs, or a mother spider who lays eggs, stays fasting, stays completely hungry for all the days till the eggs hatch out. So once you see some kind of white structure beneath the spider, in front of the spider, or behind the spider, take it that it is their egg case. Like you can see in each case here, This is an ant mimicking spider here, which mimics a soldier fire ant. This is Myrmearachna here. Here you have Meotipa, which is a theridid. Now here it has tried to make a droplet structure out of its egg case, so that if there is an enemy, it would not attack, and this can be saved. Therefore it is white in color, so that it appears like a bird dung or something which is not a spider. So they can camouflage themselves very beautifully, and they can protect their egg cases that way. This is a lycocid here, which has tied its egg case to its spinnerets behind its abdomen. You have a fishing spider here on the left, bottom left corner. In the middle, top middle, in the bottom middle, you have the lynx, which is Oxyops shweta. It simply sticks its eggs onto a leaf underside and keeps guarding it till they hatch. This is again another Oxyopidae, which is called Pucetia, the green lynx spider, which again holds it with its legs. So you can imagine the whole body part is covered, carrying the egg sac. It cannot feed and it cannot go out and hunt. So till the time, all 15-20 days, whatever it takes for the eggs to hatch, they stay hungry and fasting like this. There is no male coming them and feeding them and things happening like in the birds. Nothing, absolutely. This is more of maternal care. Let me show you a video here, a very interesting video. You can see this is a lycocid, and the baby is on the top of the back. Okay, so that was a lycocid, a wool spider, which had actually, they carry the babies on the back of their own, on their own back, till the babies are independent enough to disperse away from the mother. Let me show you one more video, because before we go back to these slides again, here is another very beautiful case of maternal care. You can see a salticid is trying to tend its eggs. Okay, so that was one more dedicated mother who could actually, stay inside the web and tend to its babies till the time they hatch out. You can see here beautiful babies. This is the mother here, and more mothers and babies and spiders and their eggs. So yes, when it comes to maternal care, they can go to unlimited heights. I'll tell you why. Look at this, another very sacrificing mother who carries the babies, and here you will find a phenomenon called matrophagy. Now, what is matrophagy, if you ask me? There is a group of social spiders from family Ericidae who would just sleep to death. You know, it's such a beautiful story which we could completely document in Utkal University laboratory. Now, look at the web size. One female creating that 5 to 6 feet tall web. The top left photograph, if you see, the white structure which is hanging from the teak tree there is a web of a Stegodipus spider. Here the spider is there in that, the first middle photograph, if you can see in the top, that is Stegodipus. Now try to look at this picture just below the living spider. Here, if you can see my pointer, I'm not sure if it is showing. This is a very roughly taken raw picture here, because the spider there is dead in the mess of a whole web which it has built for its babies. And here on the right, bottom right corner, if you see, the babies have emerged. This is the photograph of the nest on the top right, and the bottom right, the babies have emerged, but the mother has slept to death so that the babies can eat their first meal. So there are spiders who can sacrifice themselves just for their progeny to thrive. I have never seen this kind of a maternal sacrifice in most of the other animals in the animal kingdom. So this is something very, very unique to this particular family. This is the whole storyline where the mother sleeps to death upside down. And here the egg case, the white color thing. These white little spots are the babies which have emerged out, and they are there all over the mom, which has already slept to death. So it times itself so well that once the babies hatch, the death happens, they eat up the body, only the exoskeleton is left. There is no fungus, absolutely no decay. God knows how that inside of the web is maintained, and the body babies simply would disperse out of it healthy and as strong little tiny individuals. It's just enigma. Until and unless you see it for yourself, it's very difficult to really believe. Now, many people associate cannibalism along with spider feeding or spider mating. That is true, but I won't call it cannibalism. Like they say, it's very grotesque sounding if you call it cannibalism. But spiders eat their own species also. So there is intraspecific cannibalism and also interspecific cannibalism, because one spider eats up the other spider which is not its own family also. Now, why I have put this animated red-backed spider is because the black widow spider is the first which became very famous, that it first kills the male after mating. Now, there are a lot of theories here. If you want to see, I'm not sure if you can see it, but the left side, there is the male hanging on the top, and this is the Argiope spider, the signature spider with the signatures there on the web. Here it is Nephila, like I have shown you already, the giant foot spider. Again, the male hanging on the top. In both the cases of the orb weaver spiders, you see the males are completely insignificant, very, very small, and their only job is to fertilize the female, and after that, probably they don't much live on and usually eaten up by the female. Now, a story where we can show something related to interspecific, say, cannibalism. We have a salticid called Portia, and this is a very, very clever spider. I would like you to see a small video where it shows how skillfully do they hunt. Portia is itself a tiny spider, not a tiny one, but a small spider, not a megalomorph at least, which can try and attack spiders larger than its own size. Check this video out.
To help her in her quest, she's equipped with 3 superpowers. First, an amazing approach to getting about. Portia is a jumping spider, able to leap up to 50 times her own body length. Nowhere seems beyond her reach. Next, her second superpower, superb eyesight. Essential if she's to distinguish her prey in all this clutter. Because her prey doesn't stray. Portia is a spider-eating spider. This raises a few problems. Her lunch is 3 times her size, packed with venom and surrounded by a sticky trap. Mission impossible? Not at all, because of her third superpower. Portia is a genius. She can map her world in 3 dimensions and formulate a plan of attack. she can have an idea. The web builder is blind. It won't have a clue that she's coming. Right on target, and safely behind those fangs. But a mind as active as Portia's can always do with more brain food. Here, there's no anchor point for the abseil. But Portia has another idea. Instead of going to the spider, she will bring the spider to her. She plucks the strands to imitate struggling prey. Drawing the spider in to its death.
Okay, so that was a BBC movie, but that is one of the most inspirational movies which I have seen. I have myself not recorded Portia that way yet, so I have used their video, but I hope that is much of an inspiration to all of you so that you can go out in the wild and find Portia doing that live. So one amongst the whole spider world, I would say, is Portia. Class apart in its skill. Did you see how nicely it could simply launch attack while it was still hanging from that web, the thread line? So yes, that is how the skillful spiders are as hunters, as predators, and even as mothers. So let us see a little more. Yeah. Here in this slide, you see Nephila again. And why I have put it here is because this web which you see, such an irregular orb web, very different from the aranid, geometrically very sizable and sized webs there. This is a very irregular patterned web, and it is a house or a shelter for a lot of other species. So here you can see on the top right is the Nephila male, which also resembles the bottom right, which is not a Nephila. That is a theridid called as Argyrodes. The middle one is a silver drop spider which sparkles on the web of Nephila. These are kleptoparasites. Except the male, the rest of them are kleptoparasites, which would usually steal food from Nephila's web. So these are little stories about the spider life which you don't venture into a forest or a nature walk. You can never sit back at home and find them. So yeah, this is my sincere request to all those people holding those huge Canon-like cameras. Take a little time out and use your, eyes itself to find these spiders. Sometimes you would walk into something and feel the web on your face. Many of you are disgusted, but I feel very happy. The best thing you can do is when you walk in and you strike it against your face, just walk back a few steps. They will be in their place. Bend down and leave the way and walk again. Don't keep scrambling all your face out of irritation, because the web is a very, very tough and hardy structured thing which is there. It will never come off your skin. Your skin has got very fine hair. So when Portia can actually hit upon Orb Weaver, imagine the web and its stickiness, which David Attenborough has just detailed. So this is a fact of kleptoparasitism, where a huge, and Nephila, if I tell you, the giant wood spider, they have got webs spanning 3 meters in diameter. and sometimes 1 meter in radius or even more. So imagine the size of the web, it is colossal and has multiple number of these kleptoparasites there. So basically one spider trying to house lot many other creatures around itself. A whole little ecosystem there. Now, again, a very interesting picture. Can you look at this and tell me what these little creatures there around? I have already shown you so many figures like this, I mean images like this. Very clearly written here, it's competition. This particular phenomenon has also been seen in crab spiders, has also been seen in orb weavers and many other families of spiders. You have 6 to 7 males surrounding one female, like they want to tag along and fertilize, because of which I told you the mating plug theory also. They know what to do to close the opening of the female, or to at least plug it and shut it down so that no other male can come and enter. Okay. So that way, spiders are so skillful. Can you look at how tiny these creatures are? They know where exactly to go for fertilization. They know what to do to save their own progeny. They also know that after this point, after fertilization, they would not survive. And hence, courtship usually ends up in cannibalism, where the female eats up the male right before egg laying. Therefore, I have detailed a few points here. What are the theories behind cannibalism in the spiders is because mostly the intraspecific, where this female eats up the male basically, is because just before egg laying, the female has to go into a phase of fasting, or without food, it has to stay for say 15 to 25 days. And because of that, it needs a heavy protein diet so that it can stay hungry for some time, without food for some time. That's how the male offers itself as a, a gift of mating, or something you can say, where the protein content for the spider body is fulfilled. That is one theory. Sometimes it is also said that because the male is insignificantly smaller in size, has got no other very visible role to play in the ecosystem, so it is eaten up by the female as food. Sometimes it is said that before egg laying, or before or giving birth to the babies, like before the hatching happens, like I said, the female has to stay hungry, and because of that, to fill up the protein diet, the male makes itself available. So those are the theories there. Let us quickly cover mimicry. Mimicry, of course, mostly seen in ant mimicking spiders. All you see on your screen are spiders, except the top middle picture, which is that of an ant. This photograph has been shared by a friend, and rest of them are my photograph, of course. All of these spiders you see look like ants, but they are not ants. They are all spiders. So they live amongst ants, steal their food, sometimes kill the ants also. They are dutiful stalkers, very sincerely doing their job. So here you can see this particular spider at the bottom right corner is a Zodarid from Hermipus genus. On the top right is a Corinidae or Corinoma genus. The rest, the two on the left side, are from Myrmearachne subfamily, and under Salticidae family, they are Myrmearachne and Myrmeplata. So these are different kinds of ant mimicking spiders, or ground dwelling mostly. The middle one is from a Thomisidae family, and again mimicking, this is Amatia. This is also mimicking an ant. And you see different families of the spider world mimic ants only. And we've known that ants are the most prominent hymenopterans, which have evolved to be super warriors, super creatures who have lived and crossed so many barriers. They have been just so prominently adapting into every other habitat. So that's how spiders, when they are readily available in their proximity, can steal steal meals. If not meals, they can kill the ants and make a meal for themselves. More of mimicry. Here you see the top right is a wasp mimicking spider from Salticidae family. It's called Rhini genus. This is Amatia, which is, again, like I said, it has made a meal out of a fire ant. And the bottom right corner, it is Citriarachna inequalis, which is also called as bird dung spider. It exactly mimics a bird dung, like you see a poop of a bird, so that it is not eaten up by the prey. It can just mimic bird dung. So these are superbly evolved creatures which can adapt into any kind of habitat. Let me tell you that other than Antarctica, spider has been found in every other continent. They are there everywhere, omnipresent, and very, very sturdy species, adaptable like anything, can be there everywhere. These are few of the animals which eat spiders as their meal, and of course I don't like them much. This is a spider eating bird. I have seen Drosophilas and damselflies and dragonflies eating up spiders. The wasps, of course, are very good, predators or parasites, I would call, who make spiders their hosts sometimes, and who would hunt upon spiders and put them inside their webs. We'll look at the little story at the end before we finish this talk and before we lose all your patience, that how beautifully wasps can hunt upon spiders. This is a scorpion which can feed upon the ground spiders very amicably. Okay, what is the role that it plays in the ecosystem? Like I said, you can see Nephila here again eats up gallons and I can say huge amount of insects in one particular day. The spider which you see at the bottom is Bearnod. This is a very special spider because currently, like I said, I'm pursuing my doctorate on arachnology. In arachnology, I have found that this particular spider is very, very keenly and very, very typically present in the paddy field ecosystem or the rice lands, where it feeds upon a lot of rice pests. Not many salticids were found from paddy fields, but this particular salticid was very prominently present there, mostly because it can tolerate some level of aquatic habitat. Because if you look at paddy, it's a very temporary wetland kind of a habitat where not all spiders can exist, and Tetragnatha, or the long-jawed spiders, being the masters of paddy fields, these salticids come next in number after Tetragnatha and Arenidae, which take up the place of being friends to the farmers and feed upon a huge range of paddy pests. There is a Storenomorpha there in the first picture, taking up a nymph of some cricket or grylet or something there. And there is a little spider here, which is again feeding upon another spider. That is a Hylas semicupreus. I have told you about Nephila already. And huge amount of predation being done by the spiders in every other ecosystem, mostly targeting at insects. More of predation here, and you see different families of spiders. Chiracanthium here, Siler in the middle taking up ants, a wasp taking down a bee which is almost twice or thrice its size. Again, Oxyopode spider taking down a little insect there in the left corner. Here is a Pseudopoda who has taken down ant, flying ant or something like that. I'm not sure what the prey is, but all prey from the ecosystem, mostly insects, and you can see the size difference also. Master hunters, like I say, again, without movies and my videos, I'm a helpless person. I have one more beautiful video to show you here before we go to the last phase of this talk. Here we have a very special spider, like I said, Dinopede or Asianops genus, which we have found here in India. This is a Asianopus spider falling into the family Dinopede. You can see the eyes, which are ogling eyes, goggle-like eyes protruding out so badly. And one of the biggest spiders, again, after Nephila, these are called net casting spiders. Can you imagine? They create a net like this. If you see, the right side is an Australian species, no doubt, but look at the net that is almost the same across all the species of the spider. They create a net like this, nicely woven, and they would simply cast it on the prey. You want to have a look? Yeah, let us see the video. Amazing creatures. Again, this video which I'm showing you is an Australian species, but the same thing as an action happens with the Indian species also. Check it out. It's trying to make the web here, and you can see such a beautiful web it has made. It always hangs upside down while weaving the web and holds it with the first two pairs of legs. Yeah, right like that. So that the last two pairs of legs are used to hang itself. And there it goes, throwing the web into such a huge grasshopper, which it will simply suck up. It's trying to tie its silk across the victim or the prey so that it doesn't escape, and the meal or the dinner is prepared. So that is Dinopede. Let's go back to the presentation and look at a little more spiders here. Yeah. Yes. So that is net casting spider I was telling you. Right. We will come to the next character of the spiders, which make them so camouflaged in their habitats that sometimes you would miss out. Look at the first photograph. Can you even make out that there is a spider nicely sleeping there? Why do they need camouflage? Because they are nocturnal creatures. During the daytime, they need to hide away, mostly from all other predators like the birds, the wasps, and the other animals which can eat upon it. And look at the second, the corner picture on the left side. You cannot even see that there is a spider there until and unless I point it there. This is a bark-dwelling spider, also called as the two-tailed spider, Hersilia, which is so camouflaged into its habitat that one has to go close to the bark to make sure that that particular creature is there. It's completely bark color, the shades, the tone, everything looks like the bark of a tree. The first spider is Neoscona, which is merged into a messy dried flower. It is itself brown in color, that white color patch on its back. And it merges so well that it is almost impossible to make out that there is a spider. Look at the rightmost picture here. This is Tetragnatha, the yellow flower holding a yellow Thomisus, or the thomicid spider, or a crab spider basically. Look at its leg. The size or the shape of its legs basically give its name, the crab spider. The green link spider trying to hold on onto a green color branch. It's not very camouflaged there because of the egg sac, but usually on the top of a flower, even the green link spider is very difficult to be made out. The best camouflaged spider of the day is Tetragnatha, which looks like a long little twig, so nicely camouflaged with the twig that you can hardly make out that there is a spider there. So yeah, that is the way. More of camouflage here. Find the spiders there is the task for you. Here you can see Poltes on the right corner. Looks like the stump of a bark. Here is Scarostris, the bark spider itself. This is Nikki Bay's picture, which I believe the rest of them are my pictures, of course. This is a crab spider here. What is interesting is look closer on the sunflower-like spider here, which is yellow color with a black center. You have the male also there hanging out with the female. So the yellow thick fat lady sitting there is the female, and this little tiny thing with black hands, the four limbs, is the male. Now on the top picture, if you see, this is again Rini Salticid. It was there on concrete, and you can hardly make out that there is a different creature there which is not concrete. That was there, a picture taken from the road, on the road. More interesting spiders. I've shown you social spiders. This is one of them. This is Stichodipus pacificus. They make a beautiful nest like this, which has been opened up a little. This is again a friend's photograph. Thank you, Sujit, for sharing this with me. This is the female, which is bland in color, and the very beautiful and colored male. The whole of the spider world has not got dimorphism like we see in the orb weavers. Here the male is extraordinarily colored and beautiful, while the female is dull and makes this nest for the two of them to cuddle nicely before they can lay eggs together, before mating happens and courtship can go ahead. This is called a mirror spider, or again, Theridiidae is a family where you have fabulous looking spiders all across the family. Very, very different. I've told you in the beginning, the widow spiders belong to Theridiidae. The kleptoparasites, argyrodes, belong to Theridiidae. Now these mirror spiders, they also belong to Theridiidae. So if you can see the this characteristic feature of the spider is those plates on its body which exactly resemble a mirror. And this is one particular thing to deflect the light on their body and also distract the predator, that it is not a potent prey, so that it can save itself. They are soft-bodied spiders, so they need to save themselves from the predators, and that's how this is a defense technique. More of the curious looking spiders. Look at the top picture. It looks like a dried leaf fallen there. It's basically an Arachneura spider, again an aranid which makes a web but has got a scorpion like tail and therefore called as scorpion spiders also. Now this is a spiny back spider. How much of diversity can you see in one particular class? In fact, this is just, not even the whole class. This is just Arani, or only the spiders. We are looking at only the little spiders, not even the larger ones. This you see, which is an extended bark-like structure, is basically Poltis columnaris, and it would extend its bark-like structure like this and stay camouflaged all night. It also makes a very beautiful web, very sticky in nature, and can project itself onto the prey like other aranids. Here is Nathopalistis, giant crab spider from family Sparacidae. Do you see how nicely it has folded its hands like this to sit nicely with all fashionista position there? Yeah, so that's its resting position basically. This is a group of spiders which we find in Africa, not in India yet. These are the these are the pelican spiders. Can you see the resemblance between the bird and the spider? I mean, you keep exploring, the diversity just keeps unfurling in front of you and revealing itself in front of you, and nature just keeps amazing you like this. Who would have thought that a spider can also look like a bird? Okay, we had a little video here. I think it's missing, but yes, when you look at a spider web or the egg case, you will find lot of eggs clubbed like this. Can you see the eggs here and the little legs which are being formed? We have taken these photographs under a microscope, and therefore we can make out that there is a certain level of development happening. When you find an egg case hatching, when you go close to it, you will find that they trickle down one by one from the egg case, and that method is called ballooning. Because why they use this method? Because usually when it is breezy and the babies are out of the eggs ready to hatch, because they take up a lot of molting, the molts keep happening before they can launch themselves out of the case, and that is when the babies are ready to go into the world. They take help of wind and can immediately draw out this drag line, or the silk thread from which you saw Portia hanging. They can immediately draw that drag line, which is also called their lifeline, and simply fly away into independence, into their own particular independent lives. That is how ballooning happens when the egg sacs actually hatch. This is the life cycle, a typical life cycle of a spider. And I have shown ballooning here. If you can see this trickling effect of the spiders, they would drop down one by one from the egg sac and then simply fly into freedom. This is an Eriovixia and the egg sac of Eriovixia. Yeah, a gravid female looks a little. Now, before we bring this whole talk to a close, I would narrate a little story, because like Mr. Agarwal also thinks, and I also think, not every lesson is properly taught without a little storytelling there. This is a beautiful story about the wasp and the spider. Maybe many of you have noticed this. Few of you may not have seen it. For those who haven't, please take a quick look. These are potter wasps. We all know, and they would keep all these grubs and caterpillars. You can see one of them hanging long and loose. They'll bring and stuff them into these potholes which they create out of mud. They are mud dauber wasps basically, and would put these caterpillars. One fine day when I was trying to study them, this is the wall of my office museum where I work, the Natural History Museum, and suddenly what I see is a beautifully structured mud architecture built here. And if you can see these candlelight stones, the wasp has made its complete sincere effort to make it look like that, so that it can merge with the surrounding. If it makes a pot-like structure in some crevice like this, it will make sure it will make it muddy so that it is merging with the environment. Now, because it is there on a candlelight stone, it has made something similar to that. So this is Scelifron, about which I will be talking, the mud dauber wasp, and let us see what it has done. So one fine day, I had to pluck it out and tear it open to find out what was there inside. I was surprised to see that this particular nest, which you see on the top, had these kind of creatures coming out. I had not seen these many Philodromedy spiders or the running crab spiders, as many in my garden as the wasp could show me. Go ahead and see how many of them are there. Can you see? We had to count that one wasp nest had 12 such column-like tubular structures, or the nest sublet or the nest openings, where it has made cells or each individual room-like structures. In each cell like that, we found 12 spiders fitted into it. Look at the picture in the left, bottom left. Do you see legs coming out? We tried to dig a little more. And when we saw it under a microscope, we could see that all of them had spiders. We tried to dig them out, and wow. To our dismay, we found that this had got wasps' babies here sticking to the spiders, which were not dead. What was interesting was we thought that all the spiders must be dead, but when I could bring it under the microscope and press it with the forceps, I could see that it has life. All the liquid inside the body was intact. It was not dead, and it could not sense anything. That means it could not see, it could not feel or do anything else, but it was alive. So like sleeping to death. Look at this wasp babies was stuck to the spider, which has been put into the nest by the mother. It's a close-up look. More spiders, crab spiders this time. And here you have two babies in the first picture sticking to the abdomen of the spider. These babies are basically the larvae of the wasp, which have been formed out of the egg which was laid on the back of the spider, as they have hatched out into larvae, and they will feed upon the spider all life till they can hatch out as a beautiful adult wasp and fly away into freedom. So all the spiders being sacrificed as food inside a wasp's nest. That's how I had said that the wasps also collect spiders, and one female wasp had collected 144 spiders from one single garden, only in an area of 5 acres, right? So imagine how many kinds of habitat it must have visited to collect so many spiders together. And we had thomisids, we had arenids, we had some other salticids, lot of spider diversity there. Now look at this picture here on the bottom left. You have a white spider with a maroon spot and a yellow spider with a maroon spot. I will show you the last video for the evening before I can wind up my session. And I hope that video is interesting enough for you. Check it out. There's a little one sitting on the female. Okay, so that was a beautiful male sitting on the body of the female and trying to go ahead with mating. If we have the other video, I think we have not got the other video uploaded. So, okay. Yeah, so we will get back to the presentation. And yeah, so that is how inside the nest of a wasp, we could find amazing diversity of spiders available, and the males also were sticking to the back of the already euthanized females who were anesthetized almost and in a senseless condition, but not dead, like I said. And they were there because the wasp has not collected the males, but they were clinging to the back of the female already, probably in the process of courtship or mating, while the wasp has stung the female and has carried it to the pot into which, the nest into which it has to be kept. Very interesting picture again. One more nest when it was revealed that the wasp has been trying to act smart on my spiders. I tried to pull out one more, and here you see this baby has grown so big and has eaten up the head of the abdomen of a spider, and the head was left. So it got strangled into the head of a spider. Now it looks like a spider with a long abdomen. This basically, this is the wasp larvae, which is looking like this. Here you find some of the larvae, unborn larvae, pupated, which would finally emerge into a wasp. So this was basically the story of the wasp and the spider. Lot of other such parasitism happens. There is a fungi attack. There is a wasp which keeps attacking, and lot of other wasps also which parasitize on spiders. Lot of microparasites also. Sometimes wasps laying eggs inside the body of the spiders. If we look a little closely, probably there will be so many series of natural history events and so many stories to be told only with the world of spiders that I think my lifetime will fall short to document each one of them. More into this wild, into this life of this particular creature, I would ask sir to conduct more of such talks ahead, where we will go into a little advanced version, looking more deeper into the silk structure, how strong are they, how can it be compared to the strength of steel, whatnot, and we are making say bulletproof jackets out of it, nylon threads being made out of it, and you know, waterproof things made out of it, being used in warfare. It is being used to deliver tissues into bodies during surgery. God knows where biotechnological engineering has reached, and we have used spider silk for unlimited number of things in application, which I have not covered in this because I just wanted you guys to become a little more arachnophilic than you are already, and stop hating spiders for every other reason. Because one creature, and you see the diversity there, you see the number of attributes it has, I think this must be enough for us to start loving them. The next time you find your roommate, which is a spider, don't just throw it outside or beat it with a broom or a stick or anything. Keep observing how beautifully it lays eggs, how beautifully it you know, gives birth to its babies. I mean, the eggs hatch out while it's there, and how skillfully it can prey upon the insects. Sometimes you may find the cobwebs messy. Clean them when they are dust laden, but don't kill a live nest which has a spider or an expecting mother or a mother who's carrying an egg sac. We can be this considerate, I'm sure. My acknowledgements and thanks to my friends. It's there up here. And yeah, some of the photographs taken from the internet wherever I have credited it, and otherwise at the Smithsonian Museum putting up that beautiful video of the Portia spider from BBC channel, and the Australian video of Dinopis or the Dinopity. I hope I must have been able to incite a little bit of more love towards these creatures, because every time in a nature walk, I'm sure if you are vigilant enough and you have that eye to catch orb moving somewhere, you cannot escape a spider. They are that omnipresent. You can simply look at the top of a garden flora and see little solstices jumping across, eating up small insects. And if you take a little closer look, you can see all the other species, other activities which I have already shown you. I hope this talk must have enlightened your world a little more about spiders. I will work out more sessions with more stories applying, and if possible, I'll deliver them to you through short videos and some more talks, popular talks like this. Over to you, Mohit sir. I'm done for this session. Thank you very much for providing me this platform, and I hope the audience out here would have enjoyed the session. I will be happy to take some of the questions if they are there. Thank you so much. Exhaustive, I'm sure.
Most marvelous presentation, and I'll tell you, kudos to you. You're such a fantastic speaker. You know,
Thank you.
And I'll tell you, yeah, people were wonderstruck. They were just, you know, it was a jaw-dropping presentation. It was very nice. Thank you very much, and I really want to thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank Shantanu Day to bring you here, and for my team, you know, who have worked behind the scenes. But now there are some questions here which you must take, you know, at least a few if you can. And friends, before I go on to the questions, I want to tell you that we cannot cover all the questions. So you will get the replay link, and you will have the option of asking a question there. You can put the question. I'll forward it to Devi. Devi, if you are okay with it, you can share your email
Absolutely,
ID.
I'll put it down here. Yeah, it's just devispiders@gmail. It's very simple. They can just send their questions there. I'll just put it down in the chat box here for them to be able to write back to me. I'll be happy to take their questions there. And
Yes.
yeah, devispiders@gmail.com. That is my email address, and they can, they send back the questions. Maybe I can take a few questions. Oh my God, we have run into time. Maybe we have exceeded time. I'm so sorry.
So we'll start with some of the earlier ones. Pratap Singh is asking, how does female play role in male selection?
Okay, the female play a role in male selection. Yeah, this is a very peculiar and very specific question. The now, if you look at the spider males, it is a competition. Like I have already shown you, there are 5 or 6 people competing for the same female. So it is basically the most potent male which gets to fertilize the female. Now, how this selection happens is a very chemical process. It's a chemical connection which is exactly established between the two. And one of the most adult and matured males is actually chosen or allowed to mate with the female. So the female, if it sees that there are immature males around, would simply strike them off, exactly like the cricket bat would strike off a ball, and would not allow them to come near and close, and allow only the matured males which has potent sperm with them to mate. So this is again a chemical reaction which happens there. I mean, a chemical communication which happens there, and the female is able to know or guess which male is actually ready to mate.
Excellent. So Rupsna Pradhan is asking why spiders didn't get entangled in their own web. Do they have any anti-sticky feature?
Rupsana, I have already addressed this question in my talk. I was talking about that. They have got claws on their legs. If you have seen this BBC video closely, they had got very beautiful cameras focusing into the orb weaver's claw with which it hangs. So with that claw, they basically, would say set apart all the web which is there. And sometimes people ask me, if you throw a spider into another web, suppose you catch a spider and throw it into somebody else's web, will it get caught? So yeah, sometimes it so happens that they do get caught because the web is sticky. But mostly what happens is with the claw, they can detangle themselves. So spider getting caught in its own web is literally impossible. That does not happen. They know where is what. They know the whole radii and geometry of the whole web. But the other spider being thrown into another's web, yeah, sometimes they do get caught if it is not their own web.
So one more question. Jyoti Kushwaha is asking, how much magnification do we need to photograph spider eggs ballooning under a microscope?
Jyoti, we use 20x magnification with a Carl Zeiss lens here on a STEMI 2000C. That is my microscope's specification. But if I tell you generally or for a layman, any stereo zoom, you can see the spider eggs under the microscope. Any particular light microscope, which is a stereo zoom, which has got that feature to magnify it, even 20x is fair enough. You don't need 100x for that. That should be fine. And with a camera attachment, you can also take a video, like I have done in many cases.
So I know that a lot of people want to ask this question, and Varshini is asking this question. Can you suggest any guide to learn more about spiders for beginners? And I know that we all want to educate the youngsters, ourselves, everybody about spiders now. Whoever is here is deeply motivated.
Yes, absolutely. We had tried to bring out a little guidebook, which can be a field guidebook, co-authored by me and one of the IFS officers and few other friends there. So that was Spiders of Nandankanan. That was way back in 2011. But after that, I think a lot of books have come in. That was a very small book with 50, 60 odd spiders. I think P.S. Sebastian has done a wonderful job by bringing up the spiders of South India. So Spiders of India, I guess that book is. And it came around the year 2009-10, somewhere around that time. That is one good book to start off with. I think now my friends have also brought up a book called The Spider Genera of India. You find all the genus which you find in India. That is by Debomai and Ayan, and I think Atul and Siddharth. So that is available on probably on Amazon or something. That is the latest book which has come up, which details all the genera of the spiders. That's called Spider Genera of India. So we have started getting some books, some literature on Indian spiders. If possible, we will be writing a book on the spiders of natural history of the spiders very soon. Let us hope for the best, and how early we can collect, like if citizen scientists like you people come in and put in your efforts into it, this can be very easily done. We need more of observations coming in.
So we want to steer it. I just want you to quickly tell our audience your concern about pangolin. I know it's not to do with spiders, but
okay. Whenever I think of pangolins, yes, like the way you saw me so spirited about spiders, everything drains off when I think of pangolins, because as I grew up as a child, even then I was told that pangolin scales were used as amulets. Even my own village in the rural countryside where I live in Odisha, in Madhya Pradesh, in central India, where I worked, in the northeast, where not, you name it, and pangolins are being not rescued but killed, poached. I want to tell the audience that maybe it looks like a very redundant and not useful animal to us, but the whole insect world, the ants, the hymenopterans are completely based, the stability of their ecosystem is completely controlled by the pangolins. So they are very, very, very important to the ecosystem. And the amount of trade which is happening in the species today is disheartening. Wherever you find a scope, talk to the people in the countryside. Like I was telling Mr. Mohit a little earlier, that we will be launching something very soon to bring in communities together and tell them simply don't wear amulets. They don't take away piles. They don't cure your asthma. They don't do any good to you. Right? I had collected some of the scales lying on this, when I was working in the central Indian landscape. I went to those villages, and when they saw, they were like, "Madam, hame de dijiye." And I was like, "Bhaiya, isko 5 saal se mere paas rakha hai." I had to lie. मैंने 5 साल से रखा है अपने स्किन से लगा के, कुछ भी नहीं हुआ. मेरे बाल अभी भी झड़ते हैं, मेरी आंखों को अभी भी कम दिखता है. Whatever diseases I have is still there. They don't help. So these Afroasiatic values are maniacal, and the Chinese trade which is going on needs to stop. We have lost tigers. Pangolins will be lost very soon, and not even a decade left. So yeah, the concern is grim. If you can, please educate people in the countryside. ये ताबीज पहनना बंद कर दो भैया. ये जो वो पहनते हैं ना, you wear rings all across your body. They don't help you get or avoid any disease at all.
So it's a sea of work that we all need to do in natural history. Yeah,
absolutely.
I'm committed to bringing more such webinars to audiences, to network with people, to make things happen. And soon we're going to launch a new portal called Global Wildlife Fair. Its fair is for celebration, so that it becomes a place for people to, like you, to showcase your cause and to get funding into the system directly. And I will be talking about it later. But in the meantime, I don't want to end it at that. I'm committed to bringing you back for more such webinars on your
That will be absolutely great, sir. That will be absolutely great.
How you're going to take this further. And I really want to thank you for being here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. There are a few more questions, very interesting, I can see in the chat box. But yeah, Mahindra Singh and the rest of the folks there, please write back to me. They are really interesting questions, which I would have taken. We have run short of time. I'm sorry. Yeah, please write back into my email. I'll be happy. The drumming effect on Nephila and whatnot. So they have seen the video so nicely. I'm so happy that the audience here has enjoyed the talk. Thank you, Mr. Mohit. You're doing a great work, I would say. And going ahead, I see a lot of future, at least in the field of natural history, which is slowly dying away. I don't know why. The storytelling needs to increase, like you believe. Thank you so much once again.
No, we won't let it die out. We won't let it die out. We'll keep the flame burning. We'll enlarge it. Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Devi. Thank you. Namaskar. Good night. Shabbat khair. Have fun, friends. Bye-bye.